Hello and welcome to the Global Dialogue. I'm Shereen Bhan, and joining me today on the program for a very special conversation is the CEO of British Airways, Doyle. Also marking a very important milestone here in India, a century of flying in India. Sean, thanks very much for joining us and congratulations. 100's a big number.
It is a very big number, yeah. And of course, British Airways is flying about 105 years, but 100 of those have been serving India. Now, back then, it was 14 days to fly from London Airport to Delhi, and today, of course, is 8.5 hours. So we've come a long way, but we're very proud of our heritage and our presence in the Indian market.
Well, you know, you said you've come a long way, and I would imagine there's a long way to go. So let's talk about the future flight path as far as British Airways is concerned for India. You're operating, what, about 56-odd flights today a week?
Yeah, we are about 50 flights.
What could that number look like in 2025?
Well, in 25, we have plans to grow, and, you know, we have plans to expand here in Delhi. And we will be bigger than we would have been pre-pandemic. So as well as building out the network into India, we're also looking as well to build connections over Heathrow for Indian travellers who can go to maybe 31 cities in the US non-stop. Because as well as having the biggest network out of Europe to India, we have the biggest network out of London to the United States. So as well as serving the local market, we serve the connecting market very effectively.
So Sean, how important is India for British Airways today? And what's the aspiration, what's the ambition in terms of market share? Because it's still fairly small in comparison to the aspiration that you have.
Well, I think India is our second biggest market. It is strategically very important. We have a lot of links from a trade and a diaspora perspective. We think air service is a very critical catalyst for the growing economic relationship that's emerging between the two governments. But also we employ a lot of people in India. We have 2,500 people who work for British Airways here. And in fact, yesterday I had the privilege of opening up our new engagement centre down here in Noida. So we have a great team here. They're very much part of the British Airways family. And they make the experience in British Airways, you know, very, very, I think, comfortable and fit for purpose for the Indian market.
So, you know, you talked about this being your second largest market and a very strategic market for you. Now, what is that going to entail in terms of future investments, in terms of future hiring, and in terms of future expansion, you know, from a connectivity point of view?
You know, we're investing $7 billion in modernising British Airways, and that's well underway. You will see more and more of our new product on the Indian routes. Our Club Suite, which is an award-winning business class experience, is now on nearly every route, and by the time we get to the end of next year, nearly all of our flights will have that experience. We're also investing in new technology, so a fantastic digital experience, and of course we're modernising our IT infrastructure. But generally, you know, whether it's the digital experience or the onboard experience, we've very, very ambitious investment plans. And, you know, we're only starting in British Airways on this very extensive modernisation programme.
I'll talk to you about the modernisation programme in just a second, but let me labour a little bit more about the Indian market. And, you know, if you look at the IATA data as well as the IATA forecast, India is being positioned as one of the fastest growing commercial aviation markets in the world today. From that perspective, what's the kind of demand outlook that you foresee?
Yeah. I think that's obvious. You know, even compared to China, I think Indian travel per capita is about 1/10 of what we see in China. So the growth is going to be exponential. I think everybody will want to serve the market. I think it's a very exciting time for international operations into India, but also for the domestic market. But I think India is a very important strategic market for anybody who's serious about international aviation.
So let's talk about that modernisation plan that you've announced now as far as British Airways is concerned. And now a large chunk of that, I would imagine, is going to go in as far as your fleet acquisition and fleet expansion is concerned. Take me through how you see that pipeline being built out over 2025 and beyond.
About 50% of our $7 billion is fleet. The remainder is modernisation of our IT estate, a better digital experience, new lounges and a better experience on board with things like reconfigured aircraft. Then we look beyond that. I think we do want to keep on expanding our long-haul network. We want to take more long-haul planes into British Airways, and we have order books that will fulfil that ambition. Of course, we have to look at the global supply chain and some of the challenges there that we do see. But right now, we're taking delivery of the aircraft when we need them, and we have an extensive order book, which will bring about over 35 new planes into British Airways over the next few years.
Okay, 35 over the next few years. You talked about the supply chain constraints, and you know, it's Boeing largely that's facing a lot of the heat at this point in time. Does that in any way reshape your plans? Does that in any way, you know, constrain your capacity guidance?
I think, you know, we're caught up in a global issue here. I think Boeing have a lot of challenges they need to navigate through. We have a long partnership with Boeing, and we work very closely to make sure that we can support them as they, you know, change their business model. I think at the end of the day, we should never lose sight of the fact that it's customers that we need to look after here. And when our planes don't come in time, ultimately it's our customers that get affected, and we should always bear that in mind. But I think, when it comes to engine manufacturers as well, we have challenges we need to navigate through. And I think the sooner we see the supply chain get back to the level it was pre-pandemic, the better for the industry.
That's only one of the issues that the aviation industry is dealing with at this point in time. Let's talk about some of the other big headwinds, and that has to do with geopolitical tensions, which are not in your control. And that is leading to airspace restrictions. It's leading to longer flight times. How are you dealing with that as an airline?
Yeah, I think we're very used to dealing with it. British Airways operates to 200 cities in about 80 countries, so we're used to having to navigate through changing circumstances. And I'm very proud of the way my people do that. And I think the industry is very good at dealing with these issues. But we do have, Russian airspace is closed. We've got limitations in European airspace at the minute that affect operations.
And
of
now
course,
with
the Middle East
Iran and
situation
Israel, yes.
Yes, but I think we're well able to cope with that. And to be honest, our flying programme has largely been unaffected by, whatever changes and restrictions come our way in terms of airspace.
So that's not so much of a problem as of today. Crude oil prices have also been largely benign. Of course, we've seen a degree of volatility on account of the escalation of tensions in the Middle East. How are you looking at that? And more importantly, your aspiration of moving to sustainable fuel, and you've got a flight path for that as well. How confident do you feel about that?
Well, I think we are always trying to get ahead of the curve when it comes to sustainability. We have a commitment to get to 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. And as a group, International Airlines Group has secured about 30% of that supply. So I think we're leading in terms of our procurement of actually committed supply of SAF. We need policymakers to help us get more production built, whether that's plants being built in the UK and Europe, to match maybe the pace of development we see in the US. And I think that's going to be a challenge as we look beyond 2030. The oil price will be what it'll be. I think we try and hedge risk, but ultimately, you could spend a lot of time trying to figure out which direction it will go. All I think you got to do is, be flexible in the way you manage your business in the light of it.
Well, speaking of, how consumers are dealing with inflation, and to some extent, I guess they have adjusted to higher prices, but you're now starting to see interest rates move lower. In fact, we just had the ECB announce a rate cut earlier this evening. What does that tell you in terms of consumer demand, which has already been fairly resilient, but as you go into the holiday season, what's the expectation?
Well, I think, the good news about interest rates coming down and inflation falling is I think it will be good news for consumer spending. And we've been very encouraged by the strength of consumers over the last 2 years. And our indications are that will carry on. And I think it will get, hopefully, a little bit of a boost in confidence as we see interest rates fall, not just in Europe, but also potentially in the UK, as well as the cuts we see in the US.
What does that mean in terms of load factors, for instance? I mean, we've been coming off some pretty, a pretty strong base. So what does 2024 at close look like, and what does 2025 look like?
2024 has been one of our busiest summers, and I think 2025 again, we see very, very similar patterns of demand emerging. Certainly there's nothing to see at the minute in terms of any changes in demand in 24 versus 25.
What do you think has propelled this kind of demand? I mean, we saw it post-pandemic, and it was, a lot of people call it revenge travel or what have you, with the need for people to just come out after having been shut down and locked down for a good part of 2 years. What are you attributing this demand increase to?
It's a great question, and I think ultimately travel fulfills a very important purpose. I think we really missed not being able to visit our loved ones. I think a lot of people missed not being able to take that trip they'd planned over the course of the pandemic. And I think it's something that is very, very important to the way we live our lives as human beings. And I think people missed it, and they love travelling again. And we're delighted that, that demand for travel is sustaining.
So, if I were to ask you if there are any structural changes or structural shifts that aid the growth of the aviation industry, is there anything in particular today that you believe has structurally changed the story for you and the airline?
Look, I think, one thing is, of course, we've been modernising our fleets. And, the industry has actually been taking delivery of new aircraft with better range, and we're able to fly to more places directly than ever before. I think number two, in India, for instance, I think airport infrastructure has been developed, which is a critical enabler, I think, of growth of the industry. But also the other thing which I find very encouraging is people are still drawn to work in aviation. I think we have recruited 16,000 new people into British Airways, and people are still fascinated by what we do, which is fulfill something which is very exciting for people every day.
16,000 hired. Do you believe that you may need to do more?
Well, hopefully as we grow, we will need more people. And, as soon as we get our planes delivered, we'll need more flight crew, more cabin crew. And actually, we'll need more people here in operations in India, where we have 5 cabin crew bases as well that we support.
We are going to take a break here on the Global Dialogue and return to our conversation with the CEO of British Airways, Sean Doyle, on British Airways turning 100 in India.